The Bard Graduate Center wishes to acknowledge that its intellectual and communal life here on West 86th Street on the island of Mannahatta unfolds on the ancestral lands of the Lenni Lenape people, and that this island has been and is a home of many indigenous peoples. Bard Graduate Center. I'll tell you a secret, and it's a secret which those here know already, I think, but those who are first-time visitors may not, and that is that it is not a graduate center. We are not like the establishment on West 34th Street with its 30-odd doctoral programs. Nor are we a single department scaled up to the level and name of an institute. The Bard Graduate Center, rather, is a problem-based institute that attacks its problem, and for us that is how to understand the world that people make, and thus to understand the past through its material remains. That is our question, and to answer it, we draw on methodologies, approaches, and technologies from a variety of disciplines, whatever is needed to answer the specific question we're asking. If we looked at our faculty, we would see historians, art historians, anthropologists, material scientists, conservators, and archaeologists. Let me, for obvious reasons, focus on archaeology for a moment. Archaeology is a way of studying the past through things. To that end, it is a means to constructing narratives about the past. But archaeology is also a way of uncovering breaks in the narrative, fault lines glossed over by subjunctives, passive constructions, and bibliographical omissions. And another thing Foucault taught us is that archaeology is linked to genealogy, understood as the project of going backward to the past in order to find what we need to construct the future. The topics of today's symposium fall squarely into this category, breaking narratives by looking at things instead of words, and going back to a newly uncovered past in order to shape the future. We could call this, with a nod to Nietzsche's second untimely meditation of 1874, a critical archaeology. To the extent that archaeology is a kind of historical investigation, looking to a work entitled On the Advantage and Disadvantage of History for Life is not misplaced at a conference that might be most easily characterized as historical archaeology. Nietzsche suggests that there are three kinds of historical work. There is monumental history, which is a form of celebration, adulation of great men, events, artworks. There is antiquarian history, which is caring and venerating. And there is critical history, which Nietzsche defines as arraigning the past in the name of the present in order to change the future. And I think that is where archaeological projects of the sort that we will be hearing about today fall. And so it is in the spirit of critical archaeology that it is now my distinct pleasure to call upon my colleague Meredith Lynn to begin the conference. Meredith.
So welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that you're all able to join us today for our symposium, Revealing Communities, the Archaeology of Free African Americans in the 19th Century. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank BGC's founder, Susan Weber, for her incredible vision and steadfast leadership, and to Dean Miller for his support for this symposium, for all things related to archaeology, and especially to Seneca Village, and also to for his commitment to increasing the diversity of scholarship and scholars here at the BGC. To Laura Minsky and Antonio Sanchez Gomez, who are part saint and part superhero, I thank you both for your endless patience and all you've done to help organize the symposium. And I also thank the many students and staff who are making this day possible, from setting up the room to greeting people to checking them in to making sure we have enough coffee, which is probably the most vital portion of this day. And to recording our symposium, thank you. Like most endeavors archaeological, this symposium is a team effort. And of course, the other MVPs of this team are our presenters and our two discussants who've come from near and far to share their research with us today. Thank you for all the time that you've taken out of your already busy schedules and all the thought and effort you've put into creating presentations for us today. I should mention that if you've come to BGC for other talks, something different you might notice about the talks today is that they're considerably shorter, only about 15 minutes each. And this is by design, to encourage a lot more conversation, a lot more discussion. So please bear this in mind, and that each of these presenters have a lot more to say about their topics and the communities they study. And please don't be shy about asking questions during the Q&A portions of our program today. I'd also like to briefly explain how and why this symposium came about and why I think it's important. As many of you know, I've been involved for a while in a project begun by Cynthia Copeland, Diana Wall, and Nan Rothschild to investigate Seneca Village, a community of free African Americans that existed in the 19th century, just a few minutes walk from here. And we'll be talking about that more today in another paper. As part of that larger project, I'm leading a new collaborative digital initiative to create a mobile tour of the village and accompanying website to share more of our research with a broader public. And I see many of our collaborators who are involved in that project here today, and I just want to recognize them briefly. Sharon Wilkins, Herbert Signoret, Kelly Britt, Matt Riley, Jessica McLean, Zoe Crossland, Casper Mayer, Jesse Morandi, Emily Riley, Carla Rapice, and if I've missed anyone else, no. Thank you all for coming here today. It's an ambitious project, and I thought that while we were in the planning stages, it would be an excellent moment to bring together the leading scholars investigating communities that are somewhat comparable to Seneca Village. And particularly scholars who work collaboratively with descendant communities and who have a deep interest in social justice. And here they are. There were a few steps in between, hence all the previous thank yous. But they're here, and this is very exciting for all of us involved in the Seneca Village digital project. And I, for one, know that there's a lot that I need to learn. And I look forward to hearing from all of you, the presenters, the discussants, and also you folks in the audience who I know a lot about this topic. But beyond relevance to the Seneca Village project, there are other bigger reasons why scholarship and conversation about the archaeology of free African Americans in the 19th century is important. Each of our participants will demonstrate that to you throughout the day, but I'd like to sketch out a few of those reasons now based on each of the terms in the smaller part of the title here. I'll start with African Americans. People of African descent have been in North America since the earliest days of colonization. In fact, the first non-Indigenous person to live on the island of Manhattan, where we are today, was a trader of African and Portuguese descent named Juan Rodriguez in 1613, more than a decade before the first European settlers arrived to establish New Amsterdam. Captive and free Africans and African Americans have shaped our city, our country, and our culture through both their ideas and their labor in ways that are immeasurable, but often underappreciated and underrepresented in the stories that we learn about the past. We need to change this if we want to know who we are and how we got to where we are today, and how we can build a more just society in the future. This is a reality that scholars, and particularly Black scholars, have been explaining and demonstrating for more than a century. As early as 1916, the noted historian Dr. Carter G. Woodson founded the Journal of Negro History, known today as the Journal of African American History, and a decade later he established the second week of February as Negro History Week, the predecessor of today's Black History Month, to raise awareness of the important contributions of African American people to the culture and history of the U.S., and by extension, why we should think about this all year round and not just for 1 week or 1 month. African American history is American history, and I imagine you all think the same since you decided to come to this symposium, but in today's political climate, this fact bears repeating again. African American history is American history. So you might be wondering, why limit the topic of the symposium to free African American communities? Well, there are practical reasons. We only have 8 hours, and that's not even enough for that. And also for the self-interested reasons of the Seneca Village Research Project. But there's a broader theoretical reason within the discipline of archaeology, and that is that plantation archaeology and the experiences of people who were enslaved have arguably been given more attention than the experiences of free people. And although that attention is absolutely worthwhile, there was a much wider range of African American experiences in the past that also merit study. And what freedom meant to different people, and how much, and what kinds of freedoms they made, and what restrictions they faced, will be a topic explored in some of the presentations and no doubt in our discussions today. Well, then why the 19th century and not the 18th and the 20th, or all three? And there's that practical issue of time again. But also the 19th century was an important time for our country when many of the ideas and the institutions that still affect our lives today became entrenched. Industrial capitalism, mass consumption, the middle class, and the rejection of slavery are just a few. The 19th century was a period when the ideals of liberty and union expressed in the still new Constitution were being tested and altered, especially with regard to ensuring the full rights and freedoms to African Americans, Native Americans, and immigrants. And this is a project that's still not complete. Debates over these rights and freedoms played out not only on battlefields and in state houses, but also on city streets, in domestic parlors, and on rural homesteads. We'll hear from some of our presenters today about how some African Americans navigated complicated spaces and race relations, and also complicated identities. As we know, the categories of both Black and white are neither biological realities nor stable or uniform social categories. Nonetheless, these two categories and ideas about the relationships between the two have deeply structured American society, and they've been the reference point from which our country has reacted to newcomers from other nations who began arriving in large numbers in the 19th century. And many historic sites dating to the 19th century, Seneca Village among them, still have tremendous power in the present. 19th century historic sites are often used for political purposes because they're distant enough that individuals or groups can flatten their complexity to promote their own agendas, and yet simultaneously close enough that they can still affect people emotionally, particularly descendants and also archaeologists. Though we are scientists, social scientists, people who study the humanities, we categorize ourselves in different ways, depending on the day sometimes. We often develop strong feelings towards the sites on which we work and about the people who once lived there. And that's facilitated by our encounters with the tangible material traces of the things those people left behind. We feel we get to know them through their things, and this is powerful. This is a powerful experience. If you ask anyone involved in the Seneca Village excavations about the shoe, you'll know what I mean if you don't already. So why this weird emotional science? Why archaeology? So the last term that I'll talk about here. Because archaeology is a multidisciplinary field that has the ability to reveal aspects of the past that cannot be accessed by documents alone. For us, material culture is critical. We work with documents and we believe they're important too, but alone they can't tell us all that we want or need to know, even when we analyze them critically. Because documents are incomplete. They omit people and perspectives and malign others. And these issues are magnified when studying people who historically have been marginalized in those texts. As archaeologists, we use artifacts, architecture, landscapes, folklore, and oral histories and place them in dialogue with documents. This is not a perfect science, and we realize that we will never be able to wholly recreate the past, even with all of those different sources of information, but what they enable us to do is to reveal histories that were previously unknown or unappreciated, or underappreciated. Our participants are all archaeologists who studied free 19th century African American communities, and I realize that I won't have time to unpack that word, communities, because my time is up, and I will leave that as a subject for discussion throughout the day. The communities you will hear about today ranged geographically from Massachusetts to Washington, D.C., and from Illinois to Texas. Some of these communities were rural, others urban, and still others suburban. Some struggled economically, others were relatively well off. Many were united by culture or faith, others by kinship or common goals, or some mixture of these elements. Some still exist today, and others are no longer, some for reasons that are painful. All faced significant discrimination, and all made contributions to our past and deserve our attention today.